Commissioner General, right well, Eswatini Revenue Services, Chief Executive Officer from Revenue Appeals Tribunal, Eswatini, the Vice President of the Trade and Commerce, Business Eswatini's Board of Directors, all here present, Chief Executive Officer from Business Eswatini, senior government officials, journalists from different media houses, distinguished panelists here today, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning to you all, and thank you so much for joining us here at the Tax Indaba. It's my great pleasure and honor to welcome you to the Tax Indaba 2022, held here at the Royal Villas in Eswatini. Today's Tax Indaba marks another milestone in the tax policy and administration landscape of the economy of Eswatini. It's our first opportunity in the current government's term of office to present publicly this Tax Indaba, and we're delighted that so many of you have decided to join us. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the functions of a tax system involve several aspects. First, the primary function of a tax system is to raise revenue for the government for its public expenditure, as well as for local authorities and similar public bodies. Its efficiency is therefore primarily judged on whether this function is performed adequately. The second function is to reduce inequalities through a policy of redistribution of income and wealth. The equity principle in taxation implies that tax should be imposed in accordance with the ability to pay principle. This is two dimensions. There's first the horizontal equity, which means that similar treatment of persons in similar circumstances. Then there's the vertical equity, which is referred to, which is different treatment of persons with different taxation or taxable capacity. Thirdly, the fiscal system is also employed for social purposes, such as discouraging certain activities which are considered undesirable. Excise duties on liquor and tobacco as examples, special excise on luxury and semi-luxury items, the betting and gaming levy are examples of such taxes. The tax system is also used to increase the level of savings and capital formation, apart from protecting local industries from foreign competition through levies such as import duties, VAT, and excise duties. Taxation is also used as an instrument of demand management to eliminate or reduce inflationary or deflationary tendencies in an economy. From a national point of view, the taxation system has to be viewed as part and parcel of the prevalent economic and development strategy which the country pursues. And when these policies change, the fiscal and taxation policies themselves become altered. There are the issues and problems pertaining to tax administration. In the final analysis, it is the level of efficiency of revenue administration which determines the effectiveness of the revenue system. The problems and gaps in revenue administration relate both to the level of policy formation as well as the level of implementation. The Ministry of Finance is the flagship tax policy administration entity and the cradle of tax policy formulation in Eswatini, with a special ability to analyze and synthesize to weigh various alternatives in solving complex tax problems under varying environments. It's also to recommend specific courses of action in keeping with the economic and socio-political realities of our country. For the Ministry of Finance to effectively deliver on its mandate, we need advice, much to be premised on technical competence and insight into evidence-based tax policy options. A country's taxation system and fiscal policy underlying it is a major determinant of other macroeconomic indices, such as economic growth, public debt, fiscal deficit, and inflation, as well as attaining a proper pattern of resource allocation, income distribution, and economic stability. Hence, periodically, the fiscal policy and the tax structure, including its administration mechanism, has been subject to examination and proposals of modification in order to achieve its basic objectives in relation to government's policies prevalent at that time. Eswatini is a small and developing landlocked country with big aspirations. We have made a number of efforts and actively pursued policies to integrate ourselves into the global economy. We strongly believe that this Tax Indaba, held here today, is a good way to develop into a competitive and productive economy. However, we continue to face immense challenges of creating an economic environment that will enable us to create jobs and thus reduce unemployment and poverty. Indeed, taxation is central to the strategy of addressing the country's development challenges. I believe the Ministry has and will continue to help meet the needs of our country for improvement of national tax policy and implementation and management. The tax system of a country is central to the functioning of the state, in that it enables the state to do what the country expects it to do. This includes the funding of schools, health services, good roads and infrastructure, for policing, for the provision of a safety net for the most vulnerable in our society. It follows that the primary objective of our tax system is therefore to raise sufficient revenue to support the priority expenditure programs of government, to facilitate the provision of public good and services for the benefit of its citizens, and to meet its international obligations. However, it also follows that government's expenditure program should be efficient and provide value for money, and that there isn't wastage or illegitimate use of public funds. Taxation is therefore a fiscal, socio-economic contract with the people of that country, where the people entrust the government with funds to provide the basic services and infrastructure they expect from the use of these funds. I believe it's fair to say that tracking trends, analysing and raising concerns for tax policymakers underpins the relevance of the Ministry of Finance and could play a pivotal role in determining Eswatini's immediate and future development agenda. It is in this regard that the Ministry has the potential to improve the design and implementation of the tax policies in the context of government's development programs and the pressing demand to create jobs and reduce inequality. It is the Ministry's duty to lead the tax discourse and bring together a wide range of lessons and international best practices on the issues of effective deployment policy management within context of taxation. Tax policy and tax legislation needs to provide certainty to businesses. For this reason, tax policy needs to take a deeply consultative approach over many years before we legislate and implement the new measures. The input by experts and public comments are helpful to inform and revise tax proposals. We do not have an ad hoc approach to taxation. It's always a considered and a deeply consultative process, which could take a few years for major tax changes. For small changes in an existing tax, we have the consultative process that is in place, including consultation for any tax announcements made in the annual budget, which then gets legislated later in that year. After we publish draft tax bills and make comments, and only then table to Parliament as a money bill. The challenge we have is sometimes when we consult over our tax proposals, is that very few independent economists actually participate in such processes. Many comments received are usually from the affected stakeholders who have a vested interest and tend to provide comments with those interests in mind, rather than the broader public interest. No country has a perfect tax system. While there's a need for certainty and stability in the tax system, we live in a dynamic world and have to take into account challenges that the world in general and the tax system in particular faces. We're aware of growing focus on the challenges we face from multilateral corporations who shift their profits by shifting their tax base to low tax regimes or tax havens. We're aware that we face tax challenges from the digital economy. The corporate income tax base is also being eroded as a result of highly geared financing structures, mismatches of international tax rules, and the exploitation of double taxation agreements. It's not easy to address these challenges, especially in a dynamic and global economic environment. This means that tax policy and tax legislation is organic and evolves, requiring constant maintenance. but we should be careful not to let constant maintenance interfere with the big picture. We need to consider whether our tax system and the instruments that form part of it are suitable for what the future holds. The development impact of our spending legitimizes our taxes. Hence the need to spend more effectively in order to devise or to derive visible value for the revenue that we have raised. Maybe to speak slightly off the speech, off the topic, I think as Eswatini, there's obviously constant pressure, there's constant outcries around taxation. Sometimes there's a feeling that obviously people are overtaxed. I'm not so sure there's a country where people don't feel overtaxed, but obviously as Eswatini, we have that here too. As a country, our taxation is around 15% of GDP, which is the way one measures these things. On the continent, it's around 17% of GDP. A big neighbor of ours, as an example, is 26% of GDP. So even though one is sometimes criticized of taxation or high taxation, it is also an outcome of what can one deliver for that tax. And this balance is very difficult. But over the last few years, there's obviously been a lot of pressure for increased revenue within our economy. And I really believe that that over the last short term, one can speak for anyway, one has tried our best to focus, because of the trying times. I mean, as a country, as economies, we've really had some major blows over the last few years, especially Eswatini. If you add what we've experienced as a country and unique to the global economy on top of that. So we've really tried our best to not increase taxes and to not just come with new measures, as the countries normally do. Normally when there's pressure to be able to have to spend on more, cover more things, one really looks towards increasing taxes. And as a country we realise it just wouldn't be good, it wouldn't be healthy in the current environment to look at increasing taxes. For that reason, we've rather focused on where we can cut expenditures. And as a government, we have been focusing on that over the last 3 years. As you will know, the budget for the country has gone down, which is quite unique, and which I can promise is very difficult to do. But I do think where there has been wasteful expenditure within government, and there's still a way to go. I'm not to say we've arrived, but there has been a strong focus on that, and the cuts in the budget for the country have really proven, I believe, to show the commitment that we're not trying to make it more difficult for taxpayers. In fact, we're trying to rather make the savings and make improvements on the cuts. At the same time, I think there's been a strong drive to try and fix the macro economy in Eswatini. We've been on an unsustainable path. 7.5% fiscal deficit where we come from is extremely unsustainable. It really means as a country you are living on debt, and at some point that debt catches up with you. At some point, roosters come home to roost, I think they refer to it, and we will be in serious trouble, as many African countries are. And so we've developed what we call a medium-term framework as a government, and we managed to stick to it. Hence, the reducing expenditure, the fiscal deficit going from 7.5, 6.5 previous years, this year 4.5, and we're fully on track to be on between 1 and 1.5% next year, which puts any country on a fully sustainable path, which means the debt to GDP ratio does not continue growing, which means you now remain with the same debt to GDP ratio. So I really believe, as a country and as businesses and as taxpayers, one is getting into a much more sustainable economy, a much more sustainable country. Because unfortunately, one is only as sustainable as a business as what the country is. If one has got one's business in an unsustainable country, it means everything else is unsustainable. So I believe by us fixing the base as a government, as taxpayers, one is all in a better environment, one's in a better space, one's on a much more solid ground than where we come from. I really believe that the economy should start showing signs of growth. As you would have noticed, in the region, the 2020, when COVID hit, the GDP growth, the drops in GDP were quite heavy in the region. Eswatini was 1.9%. I think the least in the region. 2021, the numbers are showing between 6 and 7% growth. Again, so in the region, once again, for reasons that we believe are coming from this fiscal prudence, the economy is showing resilience and showing toughness on top of all the problems that we've had as a country. So just want to commend the businesses, commend the taxpayers, commend everybody involved in this process, and thank you for seeing that growth and for seeing that faith in the country and in the country's policies. And because one can see that in the numbers. In the year that we are in, that growth seems to be continuing, which we're very grateful for. I believe also as government, as we are trying to fix this macroeconomy, as we're building a whole lot of factory shells in rural areas, as we're issuing a whole lot of mining licenses, I think doing a few positive things on the GDP, on the economics of the country, we'll start seeing a lot more improvement. I think that growth will start speaking to everybody. When the tide comes in, all the boats rise, and I believe that when the economy starts improving, it really does wonders for the economy, for businesses as a whole. And I'd just like to request that we just continue as a country. We're still in certain amounts of pain. There's still certain things going on. Let's stand together, fight a good fight. Let us remain strong as a business. I'm referring to now. And let us get through this pain that we have, and we appreciate from the business side where we see that. I also take this opportunity to thank Business Eswatini and its cooperating partners for their commitment and support provided, and thus ensuring that Tax Indaba becomes a success. As much as Eswatini has a good tax system, and recent tax reforms have contributed to a relatively robust and equitable tax system, we cannot take it for granted that our tax system will remain appropriate for the future. Hence, we appreciate what will come out of today. In conclusion, may I invite all stakeholders to work together and support this Tax Indaba initiative and make it a success. I thank you all so much.